The sharp pain in my chest had just begun to subside when Ethan's young, handsome face appeared before me. My clear vision allowed me to see every detail of his conflicted expression: surprise, excitement, and disbelief. He muttered to himself, "I'm back. I've returned to 58 years ago, to the day of my first blind date with Julie. This time, I won't marry Julie. I want to spend the rest of my life with Claire. I belong only to the woman I love." I looked at Ethan with an indifferent expression, my gaze filled with mockery. Even though Ethan had lived to old age in our previous life, he was still as impulsive and foolish as he had been when he was young. Both of us had been reborn. But while I kept quiet, he couldn't wait to announce it to the world. His reaction, however, conveniently solved my dilemma. I didn't want to marry Ethan in this lifetime either. But in this era, with my parents' deeply traditional mindset and Ethan being the only college graduate in the surrounding villages, my parents considered it an honor for me to marry him. If I had refused this marriage on my own, my parents would have berated me relentlessly. But now, it wasn't me rejecting the engagement. It was Ethan. Ethan turned to look at me with his fox-like eyes, which had once enchanted me in our past life. Now, those same eyes were filled with disdain. "Julie, you're loud, unhygienic, and an old hag with sallow skin by the age of 25. You're not even half as good as Claire. Marrying you in my past life was the worst decision ever." Under his contemptuous gaze, I couldn't help but touch my face. My skin was now smooth and delicate, no longer the rough texture I'd had before. Tears welled up in my eyes, and for the first time since my rebirth, I truly felt that I had returned. In our previous life, after our blind date, Ethan quickly proposed. Blinded by his appearance and the fact that he was the only college graduate nearby, I had foolishly agreed. That decision sealed my fate. After our marriage, Ethan constantly neglected me. Even when I was 4 months pregnant, he disappeared for 3 years. He called me loud because, 3 months after he left, both of his parents became bedridden, and I, a pregnant woman, had to single-handedly support the family. I endured gossip, handled endless trivial matters in the village, and carried the weight of an entire household. Wasn't it inevitable that I became a haggard, prematurely aged woman? As for his complaint about my hygiene, it stemmed from the poor sanitary conditions of the time. I suffered health complications during childbirth, which left me incontinent with any exertion. But the son I risked my life to bring into the world wasn't on my side either. He admired Claire and even supported his father's plan to bury his first love in the couple's grave I had prepared for us. He urged me to be understanding. I couldn't bear the double betrayal of my husband and son. During a heated argument, they both stormed out, leaving me behind. The anger triggered a heart attack, and I died on the spot. Now, as I felt the vitality of youth coursing through me again, I wanted to kneel and thank the heavens. But my reaction seemed to infuriate Ethan. Crying, crying, crying. That's all you know how to do. What's wrong with you? Did I even say anything that bad? His words couldn't hurt me. After all, I'd heard far worse from him in our past life. However, in this era, for a woman to live independently, a valid excuse was often necessary. I let my tears flow freely, pretending to be deeply hurt. Ethan grew even more disgusted at my display. He scoffed. "Pathetic. I don't have time to waste on an old hag like you. I'm going to find my Claire." Forgetting the norms and etiquette of this era, he turned and left without another word. I watched his excited retreating figure. My face was covered in tears, but inside, I was exhilarated. In our previous life, Ethan and his entire family had leached off me. I sacrificed my youth solving all of their problems, which allowed Ethan to have the time and energy to indulge in his romantic escapades with Claire. But now, without me, that fake, gold-digging Claire, who only knew how to use sweet words to manipulate Ethan, would now have to face the harsh reality of caring for Ethan's family, supporting them, raising children, and taking care of elderly parents. When people are confronted with practical issues related to livelihood, they become irritable and petty. I had no doubt that Claire, who seemed so sweet and loving with Ethan in our past life, would become mean and rude in this one. Their relationship would be filled with conflict, and without my involvement, these two selfish, Deceitful people would surely tear each other apart and become a miserable couple. What's wrong with that Ethan boy? He's supposed to be a college student but doesn't even have basic manners. Doesn't he know there are some things you just shouldn't say? He's going to ruin that poor girl's life. Suddenly, Aunt Wanda, our village matchmaker, rushed over to console me. Oh, Julie, stop crying. Sweetheart, look at you. Crying so much your pretty little face is about to get all puffy. You're breaking my heart. Don't cry. I'll find you someone better. Someone much better than that foolish Ethan. She used her rough fingers to wipe the tears off my face, and I could feel a faint stickiness from the sugar on her hand. After everything I had been through in my past life, I cherished the youthful, unspoiled version of myself I now had. Without hesitation, I shook my head and firmly refused. No, Aunt Wanda, I don't want anyone else. I'm not looking for a man. I'll live my life on my own. What I said wasn't just an excuse. It was one of my firmest convictions after being reborn. I wasn't going to waste this second chance that the heavens had granted me. This time, I wouldn't live my life for any man. I was determined to live as a person in my own right. Someone who only sought to please herself, love herself, and strive for her own goals. Aunt Wanda thought I was saying these nonsense words because I was so heartbroken by Ethan's humiliation. She began cursing Ethan fiercely while trying to coax me gently, even saying things like, "A woman can't live without a man." Having lived a whole lifetime, I didn't bother to argue with her. Instead, I just kept crying, fully leaning into the role of a humiliated and emotionally shattered victim. Our village was well known for matchmaking, and Aunt Wanda had a reputation as a loudmouth. It didn't take long before Ethan's foolish words spread to several other gossipy villagers. In an era without phones or the internet, gossip was passed around the old-fashioned way, from household to household. By the time I got home, my story and Ethan's idiocy had already been twisted into a dozen different versions, each more exaggerated than the last. In these tales, Ethan became a bookish fool who had read himself stupid. Claire was painted as a cunning and promiscuous vixen, and I was the innocent victim of it all. As soon as I reached my doorstep, my parents, who had been anxiously waiting for me, rushed over. Seeing their youthful faces filled with concern, the tears I had calculatedly shed earlier turned into genuine emotion. In my past life, dealing with the endless burdens of Ethan's family had drained me of all my energy. By the time I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, my parents were already old, and our time together was limited. But now, I was young, and so were they. We had plenty of time to be together. "Mom!" called out, my voice thick with tears. My mom immediately pulled me into a protective hug, her heart aching at my sorrow. Behind her, my dad couldn't hold back his anger and started cursing Ethan's family under his breath. Just like that, my parents comforted me as they led me inside. For the first time in years, I felt a long-lost warmth. Drinking a cup of warm water sweetened with sugar, and eating the braised pork my mom had cooked, I started to think back on this era and its opportunities. What could make money? What investments were on the rise? Thanks to my memories from my past life, ideas flowed easily. I quickly thought of countless ways to make money. Most importantly, my family had enough savings to provide startup capital, sparing me the time it would have taken to accumulate funds from scratch. However, convincing my dad to let me use the money he'd saved from my dowry would take some finesse. After careful consideration, I asked my dad, "That dowry money you saved for me, does it still exist?" Our family might have been from the countryside, but we were far from poor. Otherwise, Ethan, the only college graduate for miles, wouldn't have agreed to marry me. I, a pregnant woman without any resources, wouldn't have been able to single-handedly support an entire household in this rural village. Yet, in that era, being a college graduate was the ultimate status symbol. Despite my sacrifices, everyone still believed I was the one who had benefited from marrying Ethan. Even Ethan himself thought he had done me a favor. This time, I wasn't going to use the dowry money my dad had worked so hard to save to support another man. I could turn money into more money and build a business empire of my own. However, just as I began to lay the groundwork, my dad gave me a wary look. "Julie, what nonsense are you talking about? What dowry money? You must be mistaken. I never saved any dowry money for you. Don't go around spreading things like that." Never flaunt wealth. My dad was afraid someone might deceive me over the dowry money, so he'd only ever mentioned it once when I was a child. Afterward, he kept it a tightly guarded secret. In my past life, I hadn't even known about the existence of this money until right before my wedding. But having lived through that life, I now fully understood the value of that money, as I had relied on it to survive for a long time. I smiled helplessly and spoke again. Dad, don't worry. I understand the principle of not flaunting wealth or drawing attention to ourselves. But you also know what happened today. It's really left me shaken. I've decided not to get married anymore. So, the dowry money is just sitting there. Why not invest it instead, like others do, and make a solid profit? After hearing me out, my dad cursed Ethan's entire family under his breath. However, parents who were willing to set aside dowry money for their daughters weren't considered old-fashioned relics in this era. My casual suggestion got my dad thinking, and he started discussing the idea with me. I passionately laid out my plans, and it wasn't long before we had everything decided. We agreed to use the dowry money as capital. I would come up with the ideas and strategies, while my dad would handle the labor and execution. If we succeeded, we would split the profits evenly. If we lost, we would figure out our next steps together. And so, my dad and I embarked on a busy, money-making journey. Ethan became nothing more than a forgotten name in the back of my mind. The next time I heard any news about Ethan was 6 months later. He got married to his first love, Claire, and it was a shotgun wedding because she was pregnant. The scandal surrounding them caused an uproar in the village. Claire's family didn't like Ethan, and Ethan's parents didn't like Claire. To make matters worse, Claire's parents, who valued sons over daughters, had initially planned to sell her off for a high bride price. The two families couldn't stand each other, leaving Ethan and Claire no choice but to marry quickly under the pressure of her pregnancy. In this era, a shotgun wedding brought shame not only to the couple but also to both families, especially the woman's reputation. It was said that Claire's parents even caused a ruckus at Ethan's house for several days, demanding an exorbitant bride price. Ethan's parents, who had barely scraped together enough money to support a college education for him, were in no position to meet those demands. But Ethan, as stubborn as ever, insisted on marrying Claire, forcing his aging parents to borrow money from relatives and friends to pay for the wedding. Now, the entire family was drowning in debt. While counting money with my dad one evening, I couldn't help but laugh as I listened to my mom recounting these juicy details. In my past life, I hadn't demanded any bride price and had even brought a generous dowry to the marriage. This time, Ethan was reduced to begging and borrowing just to get married, leaving him with an enormous debt. I couldn't wait to see how someone as short-sighted as him would recover from such a predicament. In our past life, Ethan's success had relied on two key factors. First, my dowry money and sacrifices had allowed him to focus on his ambitions without worrying about his family's financial problems. Second, I had used the status of being his wife to smooth over issues and build connections for him. Unfortunately, his shallow nature only recognized my looks and failed to appreciate my contributions and competence. What surprised me the most, however, was Claire's decision. In our past life, Claire had abandoned Ethan multiple times in pursuit of wealth. Yet, in this life, she seemed to have chosen a very different path. How could Claire have married Ethan so quickly this time, even though he hadn't yet made his fortune? What exactly did Ethan do or promise her? Or was it possible that after our rebirths, certain personalities and timelines had subtly shifted? My dad, prideful as ever, clearly enjoyed hearing gossip about Ethan but still slammed a coin onto the table and scowled after hearing the latest news. All right, enough. Why do you keep bringing up that fool Ethan from the Anderson family? Are you trying to upset our Julie on purpose? She doesn't need a man anymore. She can rely on her own brains to make plenty of money. He was right. Thanks to the joint efforts of my dad and me, in just 6 months, our family had become the first in the area to amass 100,000 yuan. We had even quietly bought a house in town. However, for the sake of keeping a low profile, we continued to live in the countryside and maintained our simple lifestyle. But money gave us confidence. My dad no longer worried about me not getting married and instead poured all his energy into making more money. For me, 100,000 yuan was just the beginning. I planned to dive into every profitable venture I could find, aiming to become the youngest billionaire woman in history. 7 months after my rebirth, news came that Ethan's parents were both bedridden. By then, I had completely forgotten about the Anderson family, until Ethan and Claire shamelessly showed up at my door. "Julie, I know you have feelings for me," Ethan said. His tone as self-assured as ever. "But the position of my wife belongs to Claire. You can only ever be my mistress." I stared at Ethan's smug expression and fought the urge to gouge out my own eyes. What on earth had I ever seen in this man in my previous life? Too tired to waste my time on a scumbag and his equally shameless partner, I coldly spat out one word: "Leave." Ethan, clearly frustrated, glared at me and adopted the condescending tone he used to take when he was my husband in our past life. "Look at yourself. Always so sharp-tongued. No man will ever like you like this. Let me tell you, men only want gentle, virtuous wives. Now, while you may not qualify to be my wife, you can still be my mistress. If you bring your dowry money to my house and help care for my parents, I promise to take care of you in the future. I might even let you have a son with me. How about that?" I laughed in disbelief. So this was his plan? How could he manage to sound like he was doing me a favor while scheming against me? Leaning against Ethan's side, Claire looked at me with malicious amusement. "Julie, you shouldn't miss this rare opportunity. Ethan is the only college graduate in the entire village. If you become his mistress..." Before Claire could finish her sentence, I pointed toward the door. "You leave too." Ethan, his goals unfulfilled, turned on me, his face twisted with anger. "Julie, don't push your luck. Let me tell you, in 6 months, I'll be rich. If you don't beg for me now, you won't even get the chance later." I sneered. "How are you going to get rich?" "By dreaming about it during the day." Though Ethan was a college graduate, his arrogant tone and mannerisms left him no match for me. Realizing he was losing the argument, he rolled up his sleeves and lunged at me in frustration. At that critical moment, my parents, who had been picking vegetables in the field, shouted and rushed over. My dad stepped in front of me protectively, while my mom grabbed a shovel and struck Ethan with it. Ethan, with his delicate, pampered skin, couldn't withstand even a single hit from my mom. He immediately let out a miserable scream. "Uncle, it's me. I'm Ethan. The Ethan you've always liked." Ethan's pitiful cries for mercy echoed as he begged, and I couldn't help but smirk in mockery. After all this time since my rebirth, Ethan still couldn't distinguish between his past life and this one. Yes, in our past life, he was indeed my dad's favorite son-in-law. But in this life, he was someone my dad couldn't wait to hammer into the ground. A despicable nuisance. A man who couldn't even separate one life from the next still dared to dream of making the most of his rebirth. What a waste of the chance that heaven had granted him. My dad spat on the ground in disgust. "I'd rather like the maggots in a toilet than you. Get out. Get out of my house." Ethan, chased out by my dad wielding a shovel, scurried away. But it wasn't long before his uncles, cousins, and even the village chief arrived at our doorstep. The village chief, Uncle Lee, sighed and said to my dad, "Jiangua, I know what Ethan did to your Julie was wrong. But he just got married, and now both of his parents are bedridden. You, as an elder." Before the chief could finish, one of Ethan's older relatives interrupted angrily. "Jiangua, you need to explain yourself. Why are you bullying someone from our Anderson family? Are you trying to start a feud? Do you think just because Ethan's parents are down, there's no one left to back him up?" My dad, already furious over Ethan nearly laying hands on me, was enraged at their audacity to turn the blame on him. He launched into a heated argument with the entire Anderson family on his own. Meanwhile, my mom quietly slipped out the back door. And soon enough, all the elders from our family arrived to mediate. With both families present, the village chief trying to maintain order, and a crowd of nosy onlookers gathering to watch the drama. I knew it was the perfect moment. I pulled out the hottest gadget of the era, a cassette recorder, and retrieved the tape I'd prepared. That's right. The moment Ethan showed up, I'd started recording. Now it was time to put it to good use. Soon, the shameless voices of Ethan and Claire came blaring out of the recorder. The room fell silent as everyone stopped arguing to listen. The onlookers' faces lit up with excitement, as if they'd just been handed the juiciest gossip of the year. Ethan's face turned an alarming shade of red, then white, as he heard his own voice. Enraged, he shouted at me, "Julie, you conniving witch! So, you were scheming against me this whole time? You're even playing this kind of trick on me? I knew not marrying you was the right decision." My dad, who was already fuming from everything Ethan had said on the recording, completely lost his temper when Ethan had the audacity to yell at me. Grabbing his shovel again, he bellowed, "You little brat! Your parents failed to raise you, so I'll do it for them." The scene descended into chaos. My dad charged forward, while the Anderson elders tried in vain to hold him back. Ethan, clutching his head, ran for his life. The village chief stood frozen, unsure of how to intervene, while the onlookers laughed and pointed. "So much for a college graduate," someone sneered. "This is the best he can do? No sense of decency at all." The spectacle ended with Ethan being forced to apologize to me. After all, I was a young woman with a spotless reputation, and I had every right to be angry. Truth be told, the fact that my dad only hit him a couple of times was already showing restraint. Because of this incident, my parents decided they couldn't trust the village to be a safe place for me anymore. We moved to the house we had purchased in town. Ethan, meanwhile, had lost all dignity. Even as a college graduate, once tainted by scandal, he became the subject of ridicule and gossip, nothing more than a joke to the villagers. As for me, Ethan was no longer worth my attention. I shifted my focus entirely to improving myself. 3 more months passed. Our family had already established 2 factories and secured stable partnerships with several manufacturers. We had also firmly established ourselves in the county town. Knowing that real estate would be a lucrative investment in the future, I encouraged my parents to allocate our surplus funds toward buying property. Meanwhile, I began connecting with people who were destined to become major players in various industries. I provided them with early-stage support, invested in their ventures, and even dabbled in the entertainment industry. I pushed forward every project I knew would succeed, helping these future powerhouses avoid countless pitfalls. In less than 3 years, during this golden era of opportunity, I became a prominent figure in my own right. But even now, I have not slowed my pace. With 2 years of experience and maturity behind me, I also began giving back to the world. I invested all the money I earned into the medical field, particularly in cancer research. My greatest hope was to conquer cancer so that my parents would not leave me early in this life as they did in the last, leaving me alone and vulnerable to the Anderson family's abuse. Of course, I wasn't an expert in medicine, so all I could do was throw money at the problem. My dad and my assistant took full responsibility for managing my ventures, while I returned to the town to ground myself and plan my next steps. "Give me 1 more year, Claire." Ethan's voice rang out in my memory. "Just 1 more year, and I promise I'll strike it rich." Shortly after returning to town, I was invited by the former village chief, now dependent on my dad for his position as the town mayor, to witness a spectacle. Ethan, once the radiant college graduate admired by all, was now unrecognizable. His skin was dark and sallow, his eyes sunken with dark circles, his hair disheveled, and his clothes dirty and unkempt. Watching Ethan, now looking like a common laborer, I couldn't help but smirk. In our past life, under my care, Ethan had always been full of confidence, clean-shaven, well-dressed, and pristine. Yet now, left to walk the path he had chosen, he had regressed into an utterly ordinary, insignificant man. The old mayor explained. Ethan and Claire, those 2 lovebirds, had a massive falling out after just 1 year of marriage. No one knows the exact cause, but after giving birth to a son, Claire suddenly lost it. She kept screaming that Ethan was a liar and demanded a divorce. But in this era, divorce is heavily frowned upon. Plus, Claire's parents had taken a fortune in bride price from Ethan's family, and with Ethan's parents bedridden, there was no way this marriage could end. So, despite Claire's outbursts, they remained stuck together. The once passionate couple now seemed to put on a show of drama every day. Ethan, for his part, played the part of the accommodating husband, pacifying Claire no matter how irrational her behavior. Listening to his placating words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. At this point in our past life, Ethan's career hadn't yet taken off. It was only with my support that things had started to improve. After being reborn, Ethan must have hoped to jumpstart his career by making promises to Claire that he would strike it rich within a year. But as 1 year turned into another, his promises remained unfulfilled. What Ethan would never realize is that the very opportunities that led to his success in the past were now firmly in my control. I had swallowed up those opportunities entirely, leaving no room for outsiders to benefit. He also wouldn't know that his past success was largely due to my pivotal role behind the scenes. But whether he understood or not no longer mattered to me. This time, I was living my life for myself. I couldn't help but wonder how long Ethan's sweet-talking tactics would keep Claire fooled. Standing silently on the sidelines, I watched the two scumbags chase after each other. Whether it was fate or some kind of karmic punishment, Ethan suddenly turned his gaze toward me. His pupils widened in shock, and he stood frozen for a long moment. Finally snapping out of it, he stammered, It's you. How did you become even more beautiful than before? Aren't you supposed to be old and ugly by now?" What a ridiculously idiotic question. I couldn't hold back my laughter. It seemed Ethan truly had no idea how harsh life could be on a woman's appearance. Even though Claire had been married to him for 3 years in this life, she still retained her youthful beauty. She might not have the flawless charm she had when Ethan pampered her in our previous life. But compared to the version of me he had neglected back then, she was worlds apart. "Julie, how are you so young? This point in time, aren't you supposed to be old and ugly?" Claire's shocked voice rang out, filled with disbelief. Just moments ago, she had been throwing a tantrum, but now her eyes were burning with jealousy. Though I'd long suspected that Claire was also reborn, I feigned confusion and asked innocently, "What are you two talking about?" The old mare, visibly angry, scolded Ethan and Claire. "Get lost. Miss Julie is an honored guest in our town. She's not someone you two can mess with." Ethan stood there dumbfounded, while Claire's jealousy practically turned into a tangible force. I smiled warmly, letting them size me up, my eyes gleaming with open provocation. In our past life, this pair of scumbags had me completely under their thumb, yet they still looked at me with mockery. Now, it was my turn to return the favor. What disgusted me, however, was the change in Ethan's gaze. There was a strange, newfound emotion in his fox-like eyes as he looked at me, and it made my skin crawl. Disgusted, I quickly left the scene with the mayor. I thought that would be the end of my interactions with Ethan in this life, but I had underestimated just how shameless he could be. Soon, he began loitering near my home, often carrying fresh flowers, trying to create an air of romance. Then, one day, he barged into my house uninvited, demanding that I return the Utian chemical factory to him. "Julie, I've made a mistake. Let's start over. I know you've been reborn, and I know you still love me. Otherwise, why would you follow in my footsteps from our past life and snatch away the opportunities that belong to me?" Ethan declared with an air of self-importance. "I'm touched that you love me, but you must return what's rightfully mine. I need the profits from the Utian chemical factory to take care of my parents' medical bills. But don't worry, I won't betray you again in this life. Claire is nothing but a lying fraud. All her gentleness and kindness in our past life were just an act. I can't believe I fell for it again in this life." As Ethan rambled on, venting his frustrations about Claire, he edged closer to me, his fox-like eyes filled with an unsettling mix of emotions. The sight of him made me want to gag. Thinking back to all the humiliations of our past life, I couldn't contain my anger. I grabbed everything within reach and hurled it at him, yelling, "Get out! Get out of my house!" The commotion startled the entire neighborhood. The old mayor arrived quickly, directing the neighbors to drive Ethan away and repeatedly apologizing to me. He promised that such an incident would never happen again. Even so, I felt uneasy and hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Ethan and Claire, ensuring they couldn't stir up any trouble that might affect me. After all, both of them were also reborn, and I couldn't completely rule out the possibility of them causing problems. For a long time after that, I lived peacefully in the town, enjoying the conveniences that money brought. The mayor kept his word. Ethan was banished from the town, and guards were assigned to prevent him from returning. From then on, any news about Ethan and Claire came through my private investigator. Their updates were often confusing, as they didn't understand some of the modern slang Ethan and Claire used. But I pieced together the truth. A truth only I knew. Claire was indeed reborn. In our past life, even though Ethan provided for her, she was never officially recognized and was often ridiculed. This time, she was determined to reverse our roles. She wanted to make me the mistress while she took my place as the legitimate wife. After their marriage, Ethan and Claire did share a period of blissful harmony. With her memories of the future, Claire knew that Ethan was destined to become a successful businessman, and Ethan, who was also reborn, had given her plenty of promises to keep her by his side. But the physical toll of childbirth, the burdens of family responsibilities, and a constantly crying child soon became too much for Claire to bear. She was no longer the gentle, considerate woman she once pretended to be. Instead, she spiraled into bouts of madness. Because of his memories from their past life, Ethan felt guilty whenever Claire lost control. He would reflect on his actions and try to treat her better. That was the pattern. Until I appeared. My presence escalated their conflicts. And during one of their heated arguments, Claire accidentally let something slip. It was at that moment Ethan realized he had been deceived. The grim reality hit him as he looked around their filthy home, filled with the stench of rotting garbage and buzzing flies. On the bed were his parents, covered in rashes from neglect. Ethan snapped. From that point on, he and Claire began fighting constantly, almost every other day, as if they were mortal enemies. It seemed as though they wanted nothing more than to strangle each other. The biggest victims of their endless arguments were Ethan's bedridden parents and their young son, Andrew Jr., who had to endure the chaos. I looked at the photos and reports sent by my private investigator, comparing the present with my memories of our past life. I couldn't help but laugh. Ethan, this is the path you chose. And now, without anyone to clean up your messes, without someone to remove all your worries, and without a strong wife to support you, you're nothing. Some time later, the old mayor came to see me with an apologetic expression. He fidgeted like a child, hesitating and struggling to find the words. Seeing a man nearly 70 years old acting this way made me uncomfortable. Finally, I decided to break the silence. Mayor, just say it. Whatever it is. If I can help, I will. The mayor forced a sheepish smile. Miss Julie, I feel terrible even asking, but it's about the Anderson family. The moment he mentioned the Andersons, I understood. However, I didn't immediately show my displeasure. With my current position and success, I no longer had any reason to nitpick over past grievances with Ethan. Patiently, I prompted him. Go on. The old mayor hesitated for a moment before spilling the details. It turned out that the conflict between Ethan and Claire had reached a breaking point. In a twisted act of revenge, Claire had done the unthinkable before leaving. She sold Ethan's parents' kidneys and even sold their son to human traffickers. I was stunned. I never imagined Claire could be so ruthless. In our past life, I had treasured my son as my most precious gem. Yet in this life, Claire sold her son without hesitation. Even I, an outsider, found her actions horrifying, let alone the mayor and the Anderson elders. The mayor cursed Claire bitterly but also expressed relief that Ethan had discovered the situation in time and managed to retrieve his son. Unfortunately, Ethan's parents, already bedridden, couldn't survive without their kidneys. They needed expensive medical treatment, and the mayor hoped I could provide the funds. For me, this amount of money was a mere drop in the bucket, given that I was already involved in charitable endeavors. Refusing to help would only tarnish my reputation. Moreover, I reasoned that without his parents as burdens, Ethan might actually feel less weighed down in the long run. So, without hesitation, I nodded. Fine, I'll help. But before I provide the funds, I want to visit the Andersons and see the situation for myself. Deep down, I wanted to witness the miserable end of the path Ethan had chosen. The mayor nodded eagerly. Of course. That's perfectly reasonable. And so, I prepared to revisit the Anderson household. I felt a mix of emotions. In my past life, under my care, the Anderson household was simple but clean and tidy, with the faint scent of soap lingering in the air. But in this life, the Anderson home was filthy and chaotic. Nikki, there's a guest. Come out and say something nice. The old mayor shouted toward the house. Nicky was Ethan and Claire's son. On the way here, the mayor had told me more about him, shaking his head with a mix of helplessness and regret. That crazy Claire. She's out of control. But because she's been deemed mentally ill, the authorities won't take her in. What's worse, she keeps insisting that Nicky isn't her son but yours. Miss Julie. She says he's your child. Imagine that. Her own son. And she's denying it. If that's not madness, I don't know what is. That's why, after all her outrageous behavior, Claire was forcibly committed to a psychiatric hospital. Before I could respond, a small figure stumbled out of the house. I looked at the boy, at the birthmark in the center of his forehead, and froze. My breath caught in my chest as realization hit me, followed by a knowing smile. I finally understood why Claire had gone mad. Nicky looked exactly like my son from my past life. Even the placement of the birthmark was identical. Suddenly, memories of my previous life flooded back. My ungrateful son standing by Claire's side, criticizing me for being petty and difficult. His final words before slamming the door still echoed in my ears. You're the worst mother. I can't hold my head up because of you. If I had a choice, I wish I'd been born to Claire instead of you. It seemed his wish had been granted. When Nicky saw me, he froze too. After a long pause, he stammered. And Mom? Is that you? You were this beautiful when you were young. His childish voice carried an adult-like tone. His gaze filled with regret. My smile widened. So, not only had Ethan and Claire been reborn, but my ungrateful son had too. Nicky, what nonsense are you spouting? Your mother is that crazy woman who nearly sold you to traffickers. Someone snapped. I waved dismissively, still smiling. It's fine. He's just a kid. Kids say the darndest things. But I'm not your mom. Nicky, I wouldn't have such a filthy child. Hearing this, Nicky's eyes turned red. In our past life, under my care, he had always been clean and well-fed. But in this life, unloved by both parents, he lived in constant fear and anxiety, unsure if he'd even have enough to eat each day. He had grown up thin, small for his age, with dark, sallow skin. Looking at him now, I was certain my son, like his father, was beginning to regret the path he had chosen. But regret was too little, too late. His gaze followed me, conflicted, his lips trembling as though he wanted to say something but couldn't bring himself to. I turned my attention to Ethan's parents. Without me, the once attentive daughter-in-law, their situation was dire. Their bodies were frail and emaciated, covered in sores, surrounded by buzzing flies. The stench was unbearable. I discussed with the old mayor how much monthly financial support would be needed to sustain them for at least another month. As we spoke, Ethan suddenly rushed over, shouting, Julie, I knew it. You still have feelings for me, don't you? If you didn't, why would you come to my house? Why would you help my family? The old mayor lost his temper. Seeing Ethan charging toward me, he threw all decorum aside, grabbed a stick, and began beating him while cursing. Ethan, scrambling to avoid the blows, looked utterly pathetic. I watched him with a growing sense of disdain. Ethan, this useless man, had been spoiled by my care in our past life. Even in old age, he had no real skills or knowledge, relying only on fragments of his memories from the future to secure fleeting advantages. After being reborn, instead of honing his skills, learning, or using his second chance wisely, he had wasted it chasing women and dreaming of miracles falling into his lap. He was an embarrassment to the concept of being reborn. Even with a second chance at life, a useless man like Ethan might still end up worse off than in his previous life. After a while, the exhausted old mayor, having vented his frustration on Ethan with the stick, turned to me with a defeated expression, shrugging his shoulders. Miss Julie, whether or not you want to offer financial aid is entirely up to you. If you don't, it's okay. I don't have the face to ask you anymore. I smiled faintly. I'll cover the medical expenses for Ethan's parents, but that's all. The rest is up to you. The old mayor was so relieved he almost cried. Miss Julie, you're such a kind person. The next news I received about Ethan came 2 weeks later. He had died in a fire. According to the old mayor, Ethan had gone completely mad. He had tried to see me but was stopped by others. Then, in a fit of insanity, He ran to the psychiatric hospital, ranting and raving about how it was all Claire's fault. That wretched woman ruined what could have been a happy family, he had shouted. At the hospital, Ethan and Claire got into a violent altercation. No one knew exactly how it happened, but a candle was knocked over during their fight. The fire spread rapidly, and by the time the firefighters extinguished the flames, both of them had been reduced to charred remains. Witnesses claimed that even in death, Ethan and Claire had their hands around each other's necks, locked in a death grip that no one could separate. After hearing the old mayor's account, I couldn't help but laugh. In a way, Ethan had finally achieved what he'd always wanted in his past life: to share a grave with Claire. The old mayor, however, sighed with pity for Nicky. Poor boy, left without parents at such a young age, and with two bedridden grandparents to care for. How will he survive? I stayed silent. This was the path my ungrateful son had chosen for himself. The hardships and thorns along the way were his to endure. A few more years passed. Ethan's parents eventually succumbed to their illnesses. Nicky, now an orphan, refused adoption and insisted on taking care of himself. According to the household staff, a boy with a red birthmark on his forehead could often be seen wandering near my home. I had a good idea who he was but chose to remain silent. The grudges of the past life had been buried along with Ethan and Claire. As for what kind of life my ungrateful son would have in this life, it was no longer any of my concern. I focused solely on myself, dedicating my efforts to charity and advancing medical technology. Heaven had granted me a chance to rewrite my life, and I was determined to give back to society, ensuring I didn't waste this gift.